Thank you for joining us for another Gray Sheet Educational Podcast. I'm Sean Schmidt, Deputy Editor. Once again, I'm joined by Marla Phillips, Director of Xavier Health at Xavier University, where she leads various initiatives with FDA officials, as well as medical device and pharma professionals. Marla began her career as a chemist and held key industry positions before moving to Xavier, including at Merck, where she was manager of the quality control lab at the firm's Philadelphia plant. Marla ultimately served as the head of quality operations at Merck's North Carolina site. In this podcast, she explains a partnership between FDA and Xavier University on a metrics initiative under the Medical Device Innovation Consortium to identify, pilot, plan, and publicize predictive quality system metrics. This is a preview of a presentation that Phillips will give at the upcoming MedCon 2015 Industry Conference hosted by FDA and Xavier University. Thanks once again for being with us, Marla.
Great, thank you, Sean. And so I will be presenting this at MedCon, but I'll also be co-presenting it with Kristen McNamara in the FDA, who is co-leading this whole initiative with me and has been for the past 2 years. So I just wanted to mention that, and looking forward to presenting this more fully during that conference. Today I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what it is that we're doing, and again, we'll talk about more details at the conference. But on the next slide, you'll see that the purpose of this whole initiative is it basically comes out of the case for quality that has been around, I think, since about 2012. And interestingly, we'll be presenting this at MedCon in a few weeks, and it was 2 years ago at MedCon where we hosted, Steve Silverman had a national forum for the case for quality, and it was out of that this whole concept of shifting our focus from compliance to quality, where we started talking about, well, how would you measure quality, and measure it in a way that industry can use it and own it for their own quality, in a way that FDA can use it to understand the different levels of quality within organizations. So out of the national forum that we had 2 years ago on the case for quality, we started this metrics initiative. And so what we're looking at from a purpose standpoint is developing a system of metrics across the total product life cycle. And that's important, and I'll get into that in a couple slides. So not just looking at your, once it's on the market and you have your typical metrics that everyone tracks, but looking at it across the total product life cycle from the earliest days of development forward. And doing that such that it enables companies to assess and improve the robustness of their critical to quality practices, and therefore risk to product quality. So we want to improve that risk, or in other words, reduce it. So the outcome of the work that we're doing is identification of quality system metrics that will inform decisions and trigger action in a way that shifts that right first time mentality closer and closer to the initial days of development. And we are on target to have our final report coming out in June of this year. So now, how are we doing that? We're leading a diverse team of industry professionals and FDA officials. And I don't have it in this slide deck, but we'll be presenting it at MedCon. That team consists of over 35 individuals. And when I say diverse, the way it came about was at that national forum and then the next year's MedCon conference, we randomly pulled together a group of people that would represent small company, large company, varying levels within a company. So, from an engineer up to vice presidents, as well as functional background. So again, we have engineering, quality, regulatory, operations, years of experience that these people had. So we really looked at trying to get a diverse population together so we could attack the problem from all different angles. And then we also had FDA officials from both the districts as well as CDRH involved in this. And we took these members through a rigorous methodical process, very, very rigorous, very methodical, I should say, with outcomes that are actually directly linked to patient safety, design robustness, process reliability, quality system robustness, and failure costs. So we didn't just come up with what can you measure, but we actually looked at what can you measure and how does that link directly to these 5 critical criteria. So what you'll see on the next slide, I mentioned the total product lifecycle approach, and we took our team members and we intentionally divided them into 3 different teams. One that was pre-production, one was production, and one was post-production. And what we found was it was interesting to see pre-production really struggling to figure out, well, what can we measure? Because in pre-production, everything's trial and error, and you're in discovery and you're researching. How can you say that anything's failed when you're still trying? So that's where, making these teams focus on a single area in the total product life cycle really helped us identify ways to measure these different areas in the total product life cycle. So in fact, that pre-production team was able to come up with things that could be measured and ways they could be measured. So as I mentioned, we have the 35 plus team members involved. We've had 2 years of work continuity on this. So there was work that we were doing where it's just FDA and Xavier University. And then, as I'll show you later, this work has been adopted since then by the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. So the first year was just FDA Xavier, now it's under MDIC, but we've maintained the work continuity, and we've continued to get deliverables step by step by step in this methodical approach. Now, one of the things that we did early on was we started off with these 3 different teams, and we said, okay, what should companies be doing? What are activities they could be doing that are gold and silver level? And what we meant by that was above compliance. Again, the case for quality is focusing on quality, not compliance. So what are some activities that companies could be doing in the critical systems that would show that they are focusing on quality? So we were able to come up with 97 gold and silver activities that cut across the total product life cycle. And then we said, well, now that we've figured out what they should be doing, how can you measure that? And we came up with many ways of measuring the activities that we identified, but importantly, we put them in a cause and effect matrix, because the cause and effect matrix forces you to think through, for each measure that I've come up with, if I were to have a poor result, would that impact patient safety? Would it impact the design robustness? Would it impact process reliability, or quality system robustness, or failure cost? So those were the 5 critical criteria that I showed you on the previous slide. So every idea we came up with for a measure, we took it against those critical requirements, and then you were able to do a Pareto analysis of the scores to see which of the measures ranked the highest as far as impacting those 5 criteria. And after we did that, we had 17 measures identified. 17 sounds like a lot, but when we divided them up, we had pre-production measures, we had measures that we were looking at during transfer, measures that we were looking at during production and post-production, and then also enterprise-wide measures. So on the next slide, what you'll see, as I've been talking about, there's kind of been 2 different phases of this. So to the left, that's the work we were doing prior to MDIC adoption, and that's what I was just discussing with you. We identified 11 critical systems, and in those systems, we identified 97 gold and silver activities that are above compliance. We put all of those through a cause and effect matrix when we were looking at how could you measure them, and finally, I identified 17 measures. Now, what I haven't mentioned is this concept of measures versus metrics. We were looking at what could you measure. Now, the next step in that, after we were adopted by MDIC, was to take 3 of those measures and convert those into defined metrics. So what's on the numerator, what's on the denominator? How can you actually calculate the measure? So we chose 1 pre-production, 1 production, and 1 post-production measure and converted those into metrics by the beginning of September of last year. And now we have 8 companies who are piloting those metrics to see if within their company they can use the metrics to identify varying levels of product quality across their product profiles. They're doing this in a way where it's a 2-year retrospective review of data that they have. And we're coming to the close of that now that we're in April, and we will be producing the report in June. But what's important, if you remember from one of the purpose statement that I talked about, and the outcome was the metric is just a metric, it's just a number. What's important is what do you do with that number? How can it inform your decisions and trigger action? And that's where what you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner there where it says how to implement documents. What we mean by that is here's the metric. What can you do with it? How can you triage root causes? How can you feed that back into loops that will fix the systems that allowed the failure to occur to begin with? What can you do with that information to improve your organization? So what you'll see on the next slide is our list of deliverables. And the 3 with the check marks are ones that I've talked about and are already completed. We've got the gold and silver activities, the 17 measures, and we converted 3 measures into defined metrics. The 2 remaining are the ones that are on target for June, where we will have completed the pilot study and the analysis of the data that we get. And importantly, we will have a document per metric on how to implement. We will also have a 4th document that goes with that. So remember, the metrics are pre-production, production, and post-production. So the 4th document will be, how do you implement that enterprise-wide? How can you use that to make decisions that will keep shifting that right first-time mentality closer and closer and closer to the initial days of development? So on the final slide that I have here, I'm just showing you kind of like the world of MDIC, and this is specifically for the Case for Quality program under MDIC. So there are a few initiatives that are under Case for Quality that have been adopted by the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. And as you can see in the top right corner, the device quality metrics is one of those initiatives. So we're feeding into other initiatives they're looking at as far as a maturity model. So metrics and how you're doing would feed into how mature is your company. Advanced analytics that are looking at product quality metrics and how that can be used by external stakeholders such as payers and providers. And then also competency is another thing that's being looked at. If we want to shift that mindset to quality, what are the competencies that need to be developed and enhanced? And then also a library of successful practices from a number of organizations, not just the ones that we talked about, the gold and silver activities, but other organizations like AdvaMed and ASQ. Now, importantly, all of that feeds into having a purpose, which is to focus on product quality, and that information can be used by both FDA and industry. So this slide just kind of shows you a potential alignment of all the various initiatives going on within the Case for Quality and how that can be used by both FDA and industry. But as I mentioned at the MedCon conference, we'll go into more detail as far as, well, what were the metrics that we were looking at and more detail about the outcomes of our work. But this at least gives you a glimpse leading into that.
Thanks for the great info, Marla. I know we're all looking forward to your presentation at MedCon. As always, you can check out our full suite of educational podcasts at thegreysheet.com. Thanks for listening.